the 15th of August, it is India's Independence Day, and for us in the automotive world, it means something huge from Mahindra. It is going to be the launch of the Mahindra Armada. Hold on. It's not called the Armada. We know it's called the Thar Roxx. It is the 5-door Thar. The hype around it is insane. And to understand all that hype, we've got every single important generation of the Mahindra to roll out of their factory gates. Welcome to Gone But Not Forgotten. These are the vehicles that gave the citizens of a newly independent nation the freedom to travel. They gave our armies the strength to push back our enemies. These are not mere vehicles, but they are a symbol of India's love for adventure, for resilience, and of freedom. Men in the 40s were freaking men. So what do we have in this episode of Gone But Not Forgotten? We're going to start with the CJ3B. This is where Mahindra's manufacturing journey started. That evolved into the CJ500, which was a slightly longer wheelbase version of the 3B. This is the Mahindra Classic, one of India's very first lifestyle SUVs. Extremely cool wire spoke wheels. Now, the off-white version, that is the MM550, the Army edition. What did the Army edition get over the others? We'll talk about that in this video. That's the Mahindra Major. Beloved even now amongst the off-road community, and this I think had one of the longest lifespans amongst any of the Mahindras. Out in the distance there, that is the Thar CRD. Now that is the 2015 update. The Thar CRD came in 2010. And to my right, the green one, that's the Thar 700. That was the last of that 2010 line. Only 700 of those were made. And this, of course, this is the reason why we are doing this video. This is the Armada, one of Mahindra's very first attempts at doing a passenger-oriented SUV. Of course, the new one is not called the Armada, but why do we love the Armada name so much? Why do we want the Armada name to come back? We'll talk about that in this video. Out there, that's the legend. That had Keshav Mahindra's signature. Only 60 of those were made. The Thar 700 actually had Anand Mahindra's signature on it. This is the Thar DI. Out there in the distance, that's the FC, the forward control, one of the very first light commercial vehicles in the country. What is your pick amongst all of these? Let us know in the comments. And now, let's get going. Usually our Gone But Not Forgotten episodes takes weeks of research, but this one didn't actually take that much time because all of it came out of Adil Jal Darokhanawala's book, Timeless Mahindra. This is the A to Z of everything that you want to know about Mahindra. I'll put a link to buy this book in our description. Now, this book is filled with interesting tidbits. For instance, do you know why the company is called M&M, Mahindra and Mahindra? So, the company was incorporated as Mahindra and Mohammed on 2nd of October 1945. It was started by three people, two Mahindra brothers, Kailash Chandra and Jagdish Chandra, along with Malik Ghulam Mohammed. Ghulam Mohammed, he went down to Pakistan in 1948. He became their finance minister. But the company had already made stationery with M&M logos and all of that. So they didn't want to junk all of that because back then, every Naya Paisa saved was a Naya Paisa earned. And that's why M&M continued and the company name was changed to Mahindra and Mahindra. And that's how it was incorporated in 1952. Also, interesting side note, Anand Mahindra, the chairman of the Mahindra Group right now, he's the grandson of Jagdish Chandra.
There's a reason why Mahindra's core products look like Jeeps, because Jeeps were what Mahindra started making. During World War II, 1,000 Jeeps came to India, and just as hostilities ceased, another 1,000 arrived. And since the army no longer needed them, they started disposing the surplus vehicles.
The US Army was faced with a dilemma: ship all these Jeeps back to the US or hand it over to their allies and scrap the remaining stuff. The latter was used, and that a vice president of the Jeep Corporation called it the greatest free sampler in automotive history.
The Mahindra story started with the company importing CJ2A Jeeps in India in the mid-1940s. Local assembly began at its facility in the Mazgaon docks in what was then Bombay in 1949.
The first CJ3s had the Go Devil petrol engine, but by 1954, once M&M got the approval from the Indian government to partner with Willys Overland Export Corporation for the phased manufacturing of these Jeeps in India, they had already transitioned to the Hurricane petrol engine. And incidentally, that Hurricane engine continued in production until the 1990s. It is ridiculous to be talking about performance, comfort, ergonomics, everything that we rate modern cars by. The Jeep was built with one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to win the war. As General Eisenhower, who was the Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, he said that the Dakota airplane, the Jeep, and the landing craft were the three tools that won the war. And driving one today is such a throwback to the times. This was built to traverse all conditions. Light in weight, very agile, go anywhere ability. When it came to India, it had the Go Devil engine right at the beginning, but then it got the Hurricane petrol engine, and that's what this has got. 62 bhp, 140 Newton meters of torque, and a 3-speed manual gearbox that is not that easy to shift. So okay, cool. So reverse is in front. Let's try first. No handbrake. So my God, how they must have driven this. And of course, live axles, leaf spring suspension. What a freaking hardy beast, I must say. You can do whatever you want with it. These things never gave up. This is the father, grandfather, great-grandfather of all the other 4x4s that we see on the roads today. If you complain about a Thar being bouncy, man, you should drive one of these. You know the true meaning of bounciness. The Hurricane petrol engine, 2.1 liters. It makes 74 bhp, some 140 Newton meters of torque, and it's made into this 3-speed Spicer manual gearbox. The Spicer transfer case, you see these are two levers. One is to engage 4x4 and the other is to engage 4-low. At the Longewala War Museum, you will see two of these CJ3Bs mounted with 106mm recoilless guns. So, on the night of December 4th, 1971, the Pakistani army, they deployed an entire infantry brigade, 50 tanks plus other armoured personnel carrier across the border at Longewala. Their plan was to breakfast at Rampur, lunch at Jaisalmer, and then await further orders before going onwards to Jodhpur.
What they didn't account for were the 120 Alpha Company soldiers of the Indian Army's 23rd Battalion of the Punjab Regiment. On December the 5th, as soon as the Pakistani T-59 tanks crested the sand dunes, the RCL-mounted CJ3Bs knocked down 2 tanks and held ground for nearly the whole night until dawn broke and the Indian Air Force Hawker hunters went tank hunting. Over 3 sorties, the IAF knocked down 23 tanks, while a further 14 tanks were knocked out by the Indian anti-tank units and those 2 CJ3Bs.
All the dune bashing that we do in the Thar desert, we owe it to the skill of our armed forces and also to the capabilities of these Mahindra CJ3Bs. Because of its abilities, because of its stealth, because of its speed in the desert, they were able to give an illusion of a much larger force, and that's why we held back the Pakistani army, and that's why we still have the Rajasthan desert where we can take our Thars and go off-roading and dune bashing.
2 of the wrecked tanks, a T-59 and a Sherman tank of the Pakistani army, along with the Mahindras, today rest at the Longewala War Memorial. Go visit.
Speaking about Mahindra's legacy, here's another Indian automotive brand that has stood the test of time. Apollo Tyres was founded over 50 years ago and today sells car, SUV and even commercial vehicle tyres in over 100 countries. Here's a call out to the Aptera SUV tyres that we have tested over a wide range of SUVs, including our very own long-term test Thar, and we found its quality, durability and performance to be top-notch. In 1955 came the CJ4. Now, interestingly, there was no Jeep CJ4. They jumped directly from 3 to 5. But Mahindra created the CJ4 that is uniquely Indian. And the main difference, and in fact the only difference really, is that the wheelbase went up from 80 to 90 inches. You can see it from the body center line to the rear wheel arch. This part is slightly longer on the CJ4. It carried on with the Hurricane petrol engine till 1974. The CJ500D that introduced diesel engines for Mahindra. That was in the mid-70s and that was to deal with the very first oil crisis. So when the oil crisis came, Mahindra had only petrol engines and their sales tanked because of that. But thankfully, they had another partnership. That didn't really take off. It was a partnership with International Harvester for tractors, but that tractor had a diesel engine. It was a 3-cylinder diesel engine, and that gave birth to the MD Mahindra Diesel 2350 engine. It was a 2.3 litre 3-cylinder diesel engine, made some 35 horsepower, but 156 Newton meters of torque. More importantly, it was fuel efficient, and that finally put Mahindra back on steam in terms of sales numbers. This CJ does not have that original diesel engine. This has got the latter Peugeot diesel engine, and that was a milestone in Mahindra's history. So end of the 1970s, Mahindra signed a partnership agreement with Peugeot. It was a transfer of technology. Mahindra paid Peugeot 15 million francs, 2.9 crore rupees for this XDP 4.9 engine. This was a 4-cylinder 2.1 litre diesel engine, made 62 horsepower, 120 Newton meters of torque, and over 3-4 years it was completely localized. This engine put Mahindra on the path towards full dieselification. This Peugeot diesel engine was not the original engine that the CJ came with, but I want to make two observations. The first is that original CJ 3Bs, those came with a 3-speed manual gearbox, but with this engine, the Peugeot engine, it got a 4-speed manual gearbox, and the 4-speed manual was from Kia. It was the Kia 4-speed manual gearbox. And the second is this transfer case for the 4-wheel drive, this Spicer transfer case, that came in with the CJ3B. It was completely localized, and this transfer case, going back to the CJ3B, that continues even today in Mahindra's pickups. So going back to the very start of Mahindra's manufacturing journey, this transfer case still continues. Now you'll also observe that I'm sitting on the correct side, on the right side, because the steering wheel is now right-hand drive. But those CJ3Bs, those were all left-hand drive, and Mahindra until the late 60s made only left-hand drive cars in India for Indian market, but they made only left-hand drive cars. And then one of their first engineering efforts was to convert the Jeeps from left-hand drive to right-hand drive. In 1981, Mahindra were at a crossroads. Their dies were already 3 decades old, so they had a dilemma whether should we make new dies with the same old design or make an all-new design. Now, the answer is obvious, but it was easier said than done, because until then, Mahindra had never invested so much or done a full vehicle design. In fact, they hadn't even bothered with doors and such. All the CJs before were canvas tops. But the result was what was called the MJ5. And then the marketing folks stepped in and changed it to MM5. And that's how the most prolific range in the Mahindra portfolio was born. The MM line was the first major design change for Mahindra. So the flat fenders were replaced by these curved fenders, and this was so adorable, so iconic, that these curved fenders went all the way till the 2010 Thar. It had such a long life. This was obviously inspired by the Jeep CJ5, but this was an all Mahindra job in terms of its design and execution. Now, the first MMs, the MM550, that had the same petrol Hurricane engine, and then later on the 540 had a whole host of petrol as well as diesel engines. This is the MM550 XD Army version. It had a lot of specific details like these lights which were unique to the Army edition. Let me show you what else was special to this model. These hooks are kind of ornamental. You could pull logs, but you couldn't recover the entire vehicle with it. The fog lamps were standard on the Army version. These blackout lights, these were only used to light right in front of the vehicle so that the enemy couldn't see the vehicle approaching. Also, the guards for the headlamps and the indicators were unique to the Army versions. This knob, S1, S2, S3, that would set the different illumination levels for the headlamps. So if it was on S3, and even if by mistake the Jawan had put the headlamps on, the lights won't come on and the enemy won't spot you in a forward operation. This here is a map reading light. These handles are very unique to the Army versions. Now this came in from the CJ3, and these were used for recovery. So Jawans could actually lift it up and move it out. But with this, the weight became too much. But the Army still wanted these handles. The 750/16 tires were also unique to the Army version. This was specified only by the Army, and these were sand-cum-highway tires. So this is the power outlet where you can take power for the tents. You had a tow hook, and also a whole bunch of lights, including the blackout lights. The 550 got the new XD 3P diesel engine from Peugeot. So that was also part of the technical transfer arrangement. This one was a 2.5-litre diesel engine, made 72 bhp, 150 Newton meters of torque. IDI engine still, no turbocharging, common rail back then. And this engine lasted till BS2 emission norms came into play. And now we come to the Armada, what many of us thought that the 5-door Thar would be called. This, in 1993, it used all the learnings from the Commander HT and adapted to make something that was a little bit more friendly for on-road driving. So this was lowered, this was made more comfortable. Radial tires, this was the first Mahindra to have radial tires as standard fitment. In terms of the styling, the first Mahindra to move away from the round headlamp look. So it got these rectangular headlamps, it got a flat roof. This could seat 10, and the reason for that was to keep the prices in check, because 10-seaters got a lower excise rating. Also, this at 2.5 lakh rupees was good value for money. After that, air conditioning was optional, a radio/cassette player, that was also optional. But this was a marked difference from everything that came before from Mahindra. So the Armada got the 2.1-litre engine, the Peugeot diesel engine, no turbocharging back then, made around 62 bhp. Later on, it also got the XD3P engine, which was the 2.5-litre engine, which had slightly more power. The Armada became the model that would mark the true shift of Mahindra to become a completely rounded car manufacturer. So the bodywork was taken from the Marshall. The chassis was all new, done in-house, rectangular section chassis. Later on, the Armada Grand, that got independent front suspension. And this was the model that then eventually generated the Bolero. So the Bolero was evolved out of the Armada. And an interesting fact is that from the A-pillar onwards, the Bolero was different. But from behind the A-pillar, all of this is the same as the Bolero. Just imagine, this was done in 1993. The Bolero continues even to this date. And all of the rear end of the Armada, it still continues to this day. That's why this is such an important model. And this was back then in the early 90s, a premium car. This molded dashboard, this new cluster, that's all modern Mahindra in the early 90s. So the Armada, it was focused on comfort, and that's why it was lowered a bit, the suspension was made softer, and 100% you can feel it on the road. On this rutted track, which the other Mahindras threw me all over the place, this is actually taking it pretty easily. And the other thing is the engine. So XDP3 4.9, that was a 2.1-litre engine, 62 horsepower, not so great in the modern context of things, but for its time, it was not too bad. It was also far more refined than the other Mahindras. So everything actually moved up a notch. It was a far more civilized Mahindra. And this gearbox, 4-speed Kia manual gearbox. Thankfully, not the 3-speed old gearbox. But you know what? Talking to these guys, turns out that the Armada was not a very popular model. Like I said, the Armada, it put Mahindra on the path of proper car manufacturing. Of course, they still had to learn tons more in terms of the quality, in terms of fit finish. The Armada was Mahindra's first stab at making a proper passenger-oriented vehicle. The Armada, of course, got massively improved with the Armada Grand that got independent front suspension. That was further refined on the Bolero. So Mahindra were on a constant path of improvement. No radical changes, no throwing away the old form book and starting off something new, but constant incremental improvements in model after model. What's 2.5 lakhs in 1993 in 2004 money? I don't know if you can do that math and let us know in the comments. That would be cool. Wait, hold up. Let me show you this. Now, this looks very different from all the other CJs around here, but this was actually made by Jeep, and this was based on the Jeep CJ5 platform. This had an extended wheelbase. In fact, this came in 3 different wheelbases, and this was all made by Mahindra. So they bought the dies for this after production ended in the US, and they started making it here. Now, when they made it, the front cowl and the chassis, that was the thing that Mahindra made, and then the bodies were made by different people based on different applications. So you had a pickup, you had a school bus, you had a police van, you had all kinds of things, an ambulance. a lot of versions. In fact, the BSF used this for a lot of their applications in the border areas. This came with both rear-wheel drive as well as 4x4. Initially, it came with the Hurricane engine, which was specifically tuned for this. It made around 71 bhp, and later on, it came with the Peugeot diesel engine. And why is it called FC? That stands for forward control. So everything that Jeep made before this had the engine in front and everything else was behind it. But here, the engine was actually between the driver and his co-passenger. Let me show you the cabin of the FC. So it is only a two-seater. This is wide, but as you can see, because the engine is in the center, you don't have that much space. So this is the lever for the 4x4. This is the gear lever out here, so quite cramped over here. That's the handbrake, and the engine, it opens up over here. It opens up in front, so all the maintenance and access is from here. Obviously, it wouldn't have been a very quiet cabin, and in fact, the BSF guys who were using it, they used to really struggle to use this, but these were one of the only things that could go to those border forward areas because of the 4x4 platform. There was a reason why this was called the FC. You're sitting next to the engine. Everything is up in front, forward control. It's loud as hell. This is nuts. This is proper torture. I don't know how I'm going to reverse this thing either. I think I'm being a little too ambitious by trying to drive this. This is not my cup of tea. It looks so cool on the outside, doesn't it? There's no place to keep my foot. My foot is like at an angle in this thing. This is wild. I don't know, there's nothing more to say on this. Looks incredible, but to drive, oh no way, I'm parking it up. Full credit to our friend Dr. Saab, who actually owns this and brought this for the shoot. To drive this in Pune city in traffic.
Mahindra's export journey started from 1969 onwards, exporting the CJ3Bs to the then Yugoslavia, Sri Lanka, Jordan, Uganda, Philippines, Singapore, Indonesia and Nigeria. This included spares, engines and fully made cars. In 1990, Australia was added as an important export market, the Aussie Motoring Press calling them the rugged beasts of Bombay.
In the mid-1990s, Mahindra management decided to use the success of the CJ340 and 540 which were being exported and convert that into a model for India. The result was the Classic, the first lifestyle 4x4 in the country. This was an evolution of the CJ3 line that started in India in 1955, but this was also luxuriously turned out to appeal to the lifestyle conscious buyer. In his book Timeless Mahindra, Adil has a valid observation. He says that Mahindra do not get enough credit because Jeep, via Willys Overland, Kaiser Jeep, American Motor Corporation, Daimler Chrysler, and finally the FCA group, they didn't keep as much faith in the CJ3 line as M&M did. It got these nice bucket seats with integrated headrests, a rollover bar, a forward-facing rear bench, and of course, seat belts. It got this Christmas tree panel with warnings for battery, oil pressure, indicators, hazard lamps, oil temperature, fuel gauge, glow plugs. This is the diesel engine, the headlamps, main beam. These two were for the auxiliary lights if you put it, brakes, parking brake. This is actually a tortoise. So this is 4 low and this is an indication for 4 high. The soft top, unlike other Mahindras, was not a piece of tarpaulin that you rolled, but a proper door with an opening flap. Now this door, it had 3 buttons, so you could just take it off, and in fact the entire soft top could be taken off in less than a minute to convert it into a proper open top motoring experience. Lots of cool touches on the Classic, like this chrome bull bar with rhino hooks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, this was evolved from the CJ3 line. Fantastic looking wire spoke wheels. The first Mahindra with front disc brakes. The first Mahindra with a 4x4 badge. Flat fenders, high hood, a direct connection to the CJ3 line. This is not an easy thing to get into. So now this has a system, okay? This has got the Peugeot IDI engine. So 3 times, wait for the glow plug to light up. This is warming up the engine. Once is done, second is done. While that is going on, we'll open our windows with zips, wait for it to heat up the engine, and then the engine cranks up. I remember the classic. When I was growing up, this was the coolest vehicle around. The Sierra would come in later. First was this extremely cool lifestyle SUV that looked fabulous. Imagine a Jeep with wire spoke wheels, put the hood down. Oh man, that time my then girlfriend's cousin's husband, I remember, had a red Classic, and I thought that was really freaking cool. This engine, this is the 2.1 liter Peugeot diesel engine. This made 62 horsepower, 120 Newton meters of torque. So this had the show, but it didn't really have the go. But everything else about the Classic is just so cool. And these wire spoke wheels, they aren't being made anymore, and they are massively in demand. A very cool thing to have. These Classics also, you can take off this soft top in less than a minute, drop the windscreen, and you get full wind in your hair motoring. It's the kind of experience that you will not get with modern cars. Obviously, with current crash safety standards, all of that put together, this is not going to happen. This is a throwback to a much simpler time where we didn't really care about all the safety and all of those things. The Classic was on the short wheelbase platform, so obviously slightly more jumpy, but soft suspension of that era. These rutted tracks can take it very well. The pedals positioned so terribly. It's so high up, you have to lift your foot to engage the clutch. Really, ergonomics and all that, that wasn't on Mahindra's radar at all. Oh. And typical of Mahindra, I still remember even the Bolero, it had this weird thing where the top of the steering wheel would obstruct your speedometer. Also the speedometer jumping up all over the place, the needle. Classics today you can't criticize because those who have Classics are die-hard Mahindra fans. They will shoot you if you criticize a Classic. But this is such a cool part of Mahindra's backstory, is it not? What do you think? Would you buy a Classic if it came back in this avatar? Let us know in the comments. And of course, Classics were only with 4-wheel drive, with that same transfer case that originated with the CJ3B, the same Spicer transfer case, and of course the Kia 4-speed manual gearbox. You would think that the Classic fathered the Thar, but no, the Classic is actually the grandfather of the Thar, because we have another important model to talk about, and that is the Major. Launched in 2004 and a production run that continued till 2010, the Major was the finest evolution of the extended wheelbase CJ3 chassis, basically the CJ4 chassis. So it had a host of improvements. Even the chassis was new. It had box section elements instead of the earlier C-section elements. And this was the last flat fender Jeep to go out of production anywhere in the world. A line that goes back 6 decades. Notice that says CL, not CJ. So in 1994, Daimler Chrysler told Mahindra to stop using the Jeep name. The Jeep name, the badge, continued on the sides of the Mahindras until then. So Mahindra not only stopped using the Jeep name, but they stopped using CJ. They changed that to CL, Civilian Jeep to Civilian Legend. Yeah baby, and that's how the line continued. CL500, CL550 Di. These Majors, they were one of the last of the proper 4x4s with the flat fenders, and even today they are prized acquisitions in the off-road community. They're known for their hardiness, for their go anywhere ability, and their sheer indestructibility. Okay, so have a look at this. Did you notice? No waiting 3 times for the glow plugs to light up and heat up the engine. One crank and this engine starts, and that's the beauty of these DI engines, especially the DI turbo engines. This is the reason why the Major is so much in demand right now with the off-road community, because of the reliability, performance and suitability of these engines to any sort of usage. The Major, it was lighter than the MM range. This DI engine, it had less power, I think around 8 or 9 bhp less power, but it had more torque. And torque is what you want when you want to go off-roading, when you want to use it as a workhorse, when you want to load it up to the roof, when you want to put 200 people inside, you need torque. And this DI turbo engine has tons of torque. Not as refined as an IDI or obviously as a common rail diesel engine, but these Majors were, like I said, workhorses. The lightweight obviously helped in dealing with obstacles, but one thing that Ravi Bala told me, convener of the Sahyadri Off-Road Club, he owns the red Classic that we have featured in the shoot. He told me that with the Peugeot engines, you would never look at the speedometer, you would look at the temperature gauge, because that always had heating issues. With the DI turbo, nothing. No problems with cold starting, no problems with overheating. The reliability of this engine was fantastic, and that's why it has remained a favorite of everybody who's used the Major. And it's got a, well, wind in the air experience. The Major had no doors, it just had this canvas sort of cloth that you pulled across when it rained, but otherwise it was free to air. No air conditioning, no stereo. This was not a lifestyle vehicle. This was a utility tool. And as a tool, as a Swiss Army knife, this worked really well. This also did not have power steering. So imagine you put 100 people into this and then you drive it without power steering. Even today in Rajasthan, you see these Majors loaded to the roof. Whew. Those guys are strong, man. The Legend was a limited run of 4x4s built on the MM platform. This was built to celebrate 60 years of Mahindra, and only 60 of these Legends were made. In fact, you had to be invited to own a Legend. The Legend was more expensive than the regular MM line. It also got all the updates that the Army editions of the MM got. Plus, it had a winch, it had racing stripes on an off-road vehicle, and also it had then Chairman Keshub Mahindra's signature on the doors. This was powered by the MDI 3200 engine. Now, don't let that 3200 fool you. This was not a 3.2 litre engine. This was the same 2.5 litre DI engine, but it revved up to 3200, and hence MDI 3200. The MM line ended in 2003 when BS3 emission norms came in. That Peugeot engine, that couldn't be turbocharged reliably, and that's why they couldn't match the emission norms. And that's why from then on, it was only the DI turbo engines in the Mahindra lineup. The Thar DI, that came in 2010, and this owes its existence to the Major. The platform is the same, the chassis is the same, the wheelbase is the same, but it has got MM styling and doors, so that's why it looks so different from the Major. This was later on upgraded to BS4 emission norms as well. That's this engine that it has got, but the engine again is the same as the Major, the MDI 3200. The Thar CRDE and the Thar DI are two completely different vehicles, even though they share the same Thar name. In the CRD, that was fathered by Behram Dabar, whereas the DI was fathered by Shrikant Ambike, and two completely different vehicles. Trust me on that.
Behram Dabar is often hailed as the father of the Thar or Mr. Thar, and played a pivotal role in the development of the Thar CRDE. He was deeply engaged with off-road communities, regularly interacting with them to understand their needs and incorporate those insights into the vehicle's design. Alongside him, Shrikant Ambike co-led the project, making these two gentlemen instrumental in bringing the Thar to life as we know it today.
The Thar DI was a more affordable version of the Thar. So when BS4 came in, that was applicable only in the cities, whereas BS3 vehicles could be sold in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, and that's where this Thar DI really did well. It was bare bones, basic. As you can see, this one's got no stereo, no aircon. Very simple, but also extremely hardy. These DI engines, they had tons of torque, so it would pull up anything. It didn't have a problem with any kind of terrain. Also very reliable, very fuel efficient, and the DI engines really made Mahindra's name. The Thar DI also, unlike the Thar CRD that had an independent front suspension, this had a rigid front axle. So this wasn't as comfortable as the Thar CRD. That also wasn't very comfortable, to be honest, but this was more bouncy. But on the other side, this could take tons more overloading. So very suitable for plantations, agricultural purposes, all that load lugging purposes. The Thar DI did the job very well. But the really cool part is how there was a Thar DI and CRD, and both two completely different vehicles. From the outside, looked more or less the same, but in terms of its application, the way it drove, the refinement, all of that, the Thar DI was a proper workhorse. This is the Thar CRDE, and honestly, this feels like a luxury car after all those other Mahindras. The seat more comfortable, the engine cranks at one start. Finally, we have air conditioning. God, how spoiled are we? Gearbox, a normal, easy to operate gearbox. I remember criticizing this Thar CRDE when it was new, back when it was launched in 2010, saying it was a little crude and unrefined. But when you see what this has evolved from, this is just so much nicer than all the other Mahindras. So much more refined, more quiet, smoother, easier to drive. This engine came from the Scorpio, made 105 bhp, 247 Newton meters of torque. So the most powerful amongst all of these other Mahindras that we've driven to now. Makes it so much easier to drive. This 5-speed gearbox, so easy to operate. This had the independent front suspension and leaf springs at the back, but when you compare it with the other ones that I've just driven, this rides like a Rolls Royce. And to imagine that compared to everything else, we said that the Thar is so bouncy and all of that, and cribbed and cried about it. But look at the evolution. If it was not for this Thar and the success that it saw, I think 67,000 units were sold over 10 years. So not that massive in terms of volumes, but when it was just a amalgamation of all the parts that were lying around within Mahindra, that seemed like a really good deal. And in terms of image building, well, what the Thar has done for Mahindra, it's been massive. It's been worth its weight in gold. And full credit to Behram Dabar for pushing the colleagues at Mahindra, those who were not really in favor of bringing a vehicle like the Thar. He pushed them so hard that they finally had to give in. And now look at where Mahindra is. All set to launch the 5-door new Thar. What a journey it has been. It's even got a bit of handling. The other Mahindras, they don't handle. There is nothing called handling in any of those other Mahindras. This 2010 Mahindra has got some semblance of handling. Just shows how it evolved over time. This is not the badge I want to show you. This is the badge that you should be looking at. It's got Anand Mahindra's signature on it, and this is the Thar 700. So the last of the 2010 Thar CRD line. 700 of these were sold in this unique shade of green. It had these fan alloys, Pankha alloys as the off-roading community calls it. It also got ABS and of course Anand Mahindra's signature. So this was the last of the 2010 Thar CRD line, and then came the 2020 Thar, which shared nothing at all with what went before it. The Thar CRD was a hybrid of sorts. Hardcore car guys at Mahindra, they scavenged the Mahindra parts bin and created this. So this had a different chassis to the Thar DI. This chassis was based on the export model Bolero. The front end was from the Bolero single cab, which was also being exported. The rear end was from the 2010 Thar DI. The engine, that was the NEF family from the Scorpio, the new engine family. And that's how this came into being, by raiding the parts bin and then the enthusiasts within Mahindra pushing this car so hard that it finally came to be, and that really birthed the whole off-roading community culture that we know and love so much today. The 2010 Thar evolved into this, the 2020 Thar. The logo, Mahindra logo was the same, The name was the same. The styling was kind of similar. But apart from that, nothing was the same on the 2020 Thar. Everything was new. The platform, the engines, the suspension, the ride, the comfort, the equipment, the space, the safety, everything was changed. In fact, the 2020 Thar, that put Mahindra onto the path of massive success that it sees itself in today. The XUV 700 that followed on, the Scorpio N, everything was a massive success, all thanks to the 2020 Thar. In fact, these old Thars, well, if you notice throughout this entire lineage through Gone But Not Forgotten, every single generation adopted and adapted the previous generation. The wheelbase was lengthened, some things were taken from here, the engines were taken from there. Everything was an evolution. This was a revolution. Will the Thar Roxx, the 5-door Thar, do the same that the 2020 Thar did? Well, I for one can't wait to find out. That video is dropping on the Evo India channel very soon, so stay subscribed to the channel. But before that, I would love to hear your comments on this video, on this episode of Gone But Not Forgotten, and of course, your memories of all these old Mahindras. Did your father have it? Did your grandfather have it? Do you still drive one of these old Mahindras? Let us know in the comments, and thank you guys for watching.